everybody, and welcome to another Houdini tutorial. Today we're going to have some fun with a couple of the poly tools and make this kind of cool Houdini motion graphics effect. And we're also going to explore the cable tool in Houdini as well. And I'm going to show you how you can make this cool kind of, it almost looks like a neon tube effect with text and lighting and additional modeling. So we're going to dive right into this and show you how you can build something like this. Let's get started. Alright, so we're going to have to start with some base text. So I'm going to drop down a geometry node and I'm going to call this base text. So in this node here, what we're going to do is we're going to drop down a font node and then we're going to basically create two outputs for this text. One that's going to be the underlying model of the text that we're going to use. One that's going to create our curves so we can get that really cool lighting effect that you saw at the beginning of the video. So let's drop down a font. So for this font, you can see this is frame 1. What we're going to do here is just type in Houdini. We're also going to choose whatever font you desire. So in this particular one, feel free to get creative. Maybe you want something a little bit more old-timey. You're going to go with like an industrial font. Maybe you want something more cartoony. It's really up to you on what you kind of decide to go and create. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to choose this. So we're going to do two outputs. This one is going to be for, let's go over here. So we're going to do a poly extrude. We're going to go over here to our poly extrude and we're going to say 1. And that looks a little bit big, so let's do 0.5. That looks pretty decent. So we'll work with that. And what I'm going to do next is also add an attribute create. And I'm going to do this for everything I create in this tutorial. I'm always going to give it a path attribute because we're going to take that into Karma and we're going to use this path attribute to apply our materials or textures and everything in between. So it's really important that you get this right. And we're going to call this Houdini now for our lines. Okay, before we jump over to the lines, what we're going to do over here to the poly is we're actually going to put in a Labs Auto UV because we're going to want some UV textures to it. We're going to also use a UV layout. And I'm going to go, and we're going to come back to this for now, but this is pretty much, let's go over to these lines and start to make our lines that are going to go around the edges of our Houdini poly, as you can see here. And we're going to take those lines and then expand them outwards, and those are going to be our like neon tubes that you saw light up. Alright, so what we're going to have to do, put a pink flag like that, just so we can ghost our text. And what we're going to have to do is decide, we're going to put down a transform on this output over here. And basically we want the neon tubes to not be behind our sign. We want them to be on the front. So what we're going to do is just pull this forward until this aligns with the front face of... You can also just select the front face of the text if you want, but I like to transform it. It's a little bit more non-destructive. And we're going to convert this to a line. Now what we're going to do here is, you can see when we look at this, we have some weird lines that kind of connect. We're going to blast these away because we don't really need them. It might add some more realism if you want like a true neon sign, because there will be, tubes that connect. In this case, we don't really need it. Now we're going to do a merge. And now we're going to just offset these lines just a little bit. So I'm going to merge them together, but basically we're creating two sets of Houdini lines now. So we're going to bring this forward by 0.1 to make sure it looks like something like this. Alright, so the next trick we're going to do here is we're going to do a poly path. Now this is kind of the key to getting this effect to work. Without the poly path, this will not work at all. So what we're going to do over here is we're just going to visualize our Houdini sign. We've got some pretty good resampling happening around the edges here, but I'm going to have to probably resample this later on. We'll double check. You can see immediately it looks a little bit too cartoony, so we're going to stay away from that. We're going to say rest length 0.1. So we're going to keep the shape of our Houdini sign. And we're also just going to make sure this is on subdivision curves because it's going to work. We're going to do the next step of this process, which is a little bit of coding. I'm going to just drag and drop my code into here and then explain what it is. And we're going to do this, but I'm just going to label this magic because that's where the magic happens. So this is this is what's making the magic happen in terms of creating attributes to drive color and emissive glows. So right now we're using, I've labeled this like for float curve U too. Probably turn on curve U up here as well on our resample. But basically this curve U2 is sampling the curve U attribute on our resample plus time with these time scale. I would just add a default value for now and that there, so we can play around with it later. But then we're gonna take that time scale value, and then we're gonna also go to this pulse, create a pulse attribute, create the shramp, and then we're going to also include our curve U value there, times it by our amplitude over here, and then times by 0.4, and then also use this emissive, and create a new emissive attribute as well. Use the shramp, use the curve to U attribute, and the amplitude. And when we create these two pulse and emissive attributes, we'll have some cool different options here to control the color, which I'll bring down over here. Switches back to point, and we're gonna do pulse. I'm gonna do some super bright red so you can actually see what's going on. So if you can see it, something's turning ever so red. So you can see with this infrared, it's a little bit more visible, but you can see these values moving up and down. So if I play this back, it's quite slow, so maybe we don't want it to look like that. So let's make some adjustments. Let's also take one more time a look at the pulse attribute as well. You can see that one's works as well, but it's like a little bit more fainter. So let's see which one we want to work with. They're pretty much the same thing. Minus one's like 0.4 in there, but I usually have both in case I need to multiply two attributes together to get like a more vibrant result later on. So that's why we have both of them there. You might not only need one for this experiment. Here I'm just gonna play with my ramp, maybe make a Bezier, maybe speed this up a little. Let's do 1 and make an amplitude of like 1 as well so we can see the extreme. So this is what it looks like to the extreme. But this doesn't seem very Houdini to me. Let's turn down the time scale a little bit. We adjust our ramp, we can get an effect. So this is looking pretty good. Let's put this color into our official node tree, and we'll call this color. We're using pulse. So we should probably make this a little bit more Houdini-like. So what I'm going to do here is just delete our non-Houdini colors. Let's go orange, go darker orange. Basically, I'm trying to create a really cool kind of gradient, and there we go, look at that. But you can also see here that we've got some kind of uneven motion, like some places it's moving faster than others. We do get, and maybe we need to adjust how, this color pattern is moving across our line. So let's make some adjustments. So because we're using pulse, let's go into our attributes. Let's create an attribute fop, and we're gonna say edit, pulse, and emissive. I want to make sure that whatever happens here, we kind of remap our emissive and pulse values just so it's in a controllable range that we can work with better. So what we're going to do is just drop this down here. This one's going to say emissive. This one over here, we're going to drop down a fit range for both. And now we're going to drop down a bind export. So over here, this one's pulse, so we're going to say pulse. We're not going to see a huge change yet. You should see something in a second. Actually, no, this is emissive. My bad. Let's go make sure we're actually selecting the name of the attribute, which is a capital E. Hey, look at that. Big difference already. So you can see if I shorten down the min and max, you can see we're going to get something that looks like this. Which honestly might be something, if you want to have something like very pulsy. It depends on what type of pulsing you are going for in terms of values, because like you can just rearrange it here if you wanted. I'm going to go with something like this for now. And I think what I'm also going to try and do just for the hell of it. Okay, so I'm going to try multiplying our emissive attribute that we're bringing in as well against our pulse. And you can see here when I do so, and I also remap it here, I get different results as well. So you can see this one actually looks really interesting now that I've multiplied it. So using fit2, I've changed the values over here. This almost kind of congeals, makes the movements on each line look a little bit more consistent. So I'm going to go with this version here. And once again, I'm also going to just make sure everything is in a fit range between 1 and 0, because if you subtract something by something, things can go wrong. So we're going to do a fit 3. Let's go with fit 3. This looks pretty cool so far, so let's do this. Alright, so now that we have this set up and our color, I'm going to set up an attribute so I can render this later on called width. Because if we render these lines as is, they're going to be super, super thick. So they need something called, I'm going to use something called width. So we're going to use width. Well, actually, let's leave it on the point level. And we're going to do 0.01 just for now as a starting value. That might need to be smaller, but that's going to work for us. Awesome. So we have outlines and we should be good to go. Oh, one more thing. We also need to go over here wherever we created the path attribute for our text. We're also going to create a path attribute for these lines. So we're going to call these out Houdini text lines, so we know that these are the lines for the text. Alright, so now we're going to do some modeling magic, and we're going to go down here to poly wire, and we're going to make these into a poly wire. And so the width is going to be automatically really thick, so I think that looks fine for now. Now we're going to use an attribute delete to delete color. And you may be wondering why I'm doing this. Well, we're not rendering these poly wires, we are using them for something else. So we don't need any of the attributes on it per se, but we do need, I would say I'm going to also put the UVs as well on here, because we're going to need those as well. And we're going to go down here where it says out poly and go Boolean. And you can see here when I do this, get some nice tapered edges, because we're intersecting the wire with the text, so it gets that nice taperedness to it. Oh, we forgot to output the back, so let's do that. Let's go up to our poly extrude and output back. Alright, so I think we're good for the first step of this, and I think I'm going to also file cache this. Oh, another thing we need to do is where it says attribute delete up here, we also need to delete the path, otherwise the path attribute will be transferred onto our text geometry, and we don't want that, so we're going to do text, and because this isn't moving, we don't need time to bend it. Now we're going to just go through here and just put some network boxes in certain places so we can keep track of what's happening in our scene. So I'm going to drag this down over here and put this in a network box. And once it's in a box, you don't have to come back to that. And it'll just, clears your mind that you've, looked that area over. Now the cool thing about, I just want to pay attention to our text, even though it's like the most simplest part of this tutorial, is that if you want to make sure, you got to make sure all the faces, once you boolean something, are pointing the right way, so it's always a good idea to put down a normal node. And now we also want to give ourselves the option here of choosing what we want to place materials on. So I find when I'm working with big blocky text, sometimes I want the interface here to have a different material or texture than the rest of the object. So what I'm doing here is selecting all of the faces, and I'm going to put down an attribute create. Well, actually, I'm going to put this in a group called faces. And then I'm also going to, if I want to later on, because we have everything else we may want to separate. You can also group by letter if you choose so, but I'm going to group by face, and I'm also going to drop down a group by expression. So we're going to select the inverse of the face, which what we're going to do over here is just say it's on primitive. We're going to call this sides, and we're going to say at group faces equals 0. We should have all the faces, everything that's not in the faces group here should be in this group. And there we go. So you should have something that looks like this. And once you have that, you can go back up here where we created our path attribute. And now if you've decided you want to, texture by faces, you can create this is going to be the text face, and you just choose the faces group, and this will be the sides. So now that should be good for that section. And now let's go into the magic of going back over to these lines and building them out to look like neon tubes. So now what we're going to do next is that you can see here where we have, now that we built the color this kind of little glowing effect that's wrapping around our tube and lighting it up. We also want to create the glass like encasing for our neon, and we also want to create this kind of, what you can see, these kind of beveled effect on the glass tubing. So we're going to do that next, and we're going to dive right in. Okay, now that we have our lines, we are going to go back up here where we just kind of created this before the polypath. So I'm going to create a little null up here, and we're going to plug this base into a polywire. I'm actually thinking we can probably make it the same polywire that we have over here, so I'm actually going to delete this polywire, and I'm going to go over here to this one, and I'm going to say create reference copy, and then plug it into here. Because technically it is like the same size that we're using, so it's not so big of a deal, but we're gonna say, give me some thickness. I think this is cool. We're gonna preview this right now with our sign just to see if it matches. Because if it doesn't match, we gotta redo it, right? So we'll go over here, we'll plug this boy, and we're gonna get something that looks like this. You might be wondering why there's a gap in between our lines here. Well, we're gonna put all our cabling in between these two polywires. So don't get too panicked that there's a space in between here. We're gonna go fill that afterwards. But now that we have, this is going to be the glass body. And so now what we have to do is create that metal or beveling in this tube. So the way we're gonna go about doing that is gonna be a little bit sneaky. What we're going to do over here is we're gonna do attribute delete. So what we're gonna do next is we're not gonna attribute delete it. We are going to do another polywire connected to our base over here. This one's gonna be a little bit different. So we're gonna do 0.01. Make this look a little bit chonky, it doesn't matter. We're gonna go over here, put a transform. Transform this ever so slightly outwards, so 0.14. And we're gonna Boolean this. So as of right now, you should get something that looks like this shape. And you can see that gave this a lot of definition and a lot more intrigue in terms of the shape that we want to see on our Houdini. Look at that. That looks way more interesting. Now the problem here is that we have our wire. And we want to see where our neon is. So let's see how this looks inside of that. So this is how it's looking inside that tubing now. We're going to just steal our attribute crate. We're going to put this over here, and we're going to say this is the neon glass. Alright, so now we have the first half of the tutorial done. Up here on the outlines here, you should have some glowy color. And as if you've made it this far, we are now ready to start adding the cabling to our text.